Well, joining us now is dperry, international affairs analyst. You know, I think the first question that everybody has is Netanyahu realistically in a position to shape these talks?
I wouldn't rule out that persuasion still exists in this world, and who knows, Trump might listen to Netanyahu's arguments and be swayed. I think Netanyahu comes with very powerful arguments. The objection to Iran is not just about the nuclear program, it's also about the ballistic missiles and their absolutely outrageous policy of filling the Middle East with militias that do their bidding and undermine these countries. The music coming out of public statements, and generally I would say that we can safely ignore public statements during negotiations, but the music we're hearing is that Iran's going to insist it be solely about the nuclear, and I'm getting the sense that they might be willing to limit nuclear uranium enrichment to maybe 5%, the civilian level. And that's where Trump may have something to give them because he's insisting that they do no enrichment at all. In this, he doesn't have much of a leg to stand on because as members of the NPT, they're allowed to do civilian level enrichment. So one can envision where this ends up with a deal where Iran basically promises not to enrich at weaponizable levels, and Trump suffices with that, declares victory, and says it's so great because Sleepy Joe could never have done it. But it would be very similar to the Obama-era agreement where the issue was verification, and Trump walked away from it, and I'm sure he'll claim that now verification is serious. So Israel doesn't want that, because Israel considered that after the 12-day war, there was a rare moment where you could force the regime's hand, and that is slipping away. And I think what Netanyahu is going to try to convince Trump of is that it would be very foolish. It would be the actions of a sucker and a loser to let that opportunity slip away.
Right. You know, we're also seeing these varying reports that Israel may consider a strike of its own if the United States, in fact, chooses not to move forward with military pressure. The question, of course, is what that would mean in terms of Israeli-American relations. If that is something that, you know, Trump would perhaps support, it would maybe relieve some type of domestic pressure that he's facing regarding getting involved in Iran, and how far Israel is really willing to go when it comes to this issue.
I think this attaches to the unknowable question of whether, or maybe it is knowable, whether Israel can take such action without American permission, especially when America is so intimately involved in everything about the interaction currently with Iran. A lot of people are going to be skeptical that Israel can take that move without American permission. And you'll hear other voices in Israel saying, well, they have no choice because, you know, Israel's existence is at stake. That's somewhat false, because Israel also faced the threat from ballistic missiles for over a decade or more and did nothing about it until they felt like they could, or that they were pushed too far last June. I'm doubting Israel can do something against America's wishes, but it's not inconceivable that the U.S., while pretending otherwise in public, will allow them to do that because, as you were suggesting in your question, it's a better look internationally.
Hamas is drawing a hard line on Gaza. Senior leader Khalid Mashal has told international audiences this week that the group will not disarm or accept foreign control, essentially pushing back against repeated demands from the U.S. and Israel. This has been the fundamental issue since the very beginning. Hamas refusing to disarm, now once again explicitly stating that. What does this mean for the U.S. administration, for Trump?
Trump and everyone else who cares have a very difficult choice. Do you make good on the implied threat to not allow any reconstruction to begin in Gaza and to leave 2 million people living in hovels and ruins and tents during the winter and beyond because Hamas won't disarm? There's a logic to doing just that, but it's incredibly cruel. And Hamas is betting that everyone will just break and allow it to happen, and maybe allow it to happen through some in-between solution where they store their weapons but don't give them up. And I don't think that's going to go down well in Israel, and I doubt Trump can really accept that, given that, I mean, just a few weeks ago in Davos, he was saying they either disarm or they'll be destroyed. Now,
right, well, who will destroy them? That is, of course, the question.
To me, like Israel would get the green light to resume the war, but this time able to deliver a coup de grace because there's no longer hostages held by Hamas. That said, though, Israel didn't really go lightly, even with the hostages. Just recently, we had a security official suggesting that the death toll that a lot of us were skeptical about, of 70,000 people killed, perhaps half civilians, might have been true. And you look at Gaza, it's in ruins. So the idea of resuming the war and this time doing it better and getting rid of Hamas that way, not that appealing, and it will not be popular in Israel during an election cycle. So this is complicated, and it raises the question, what what else can be done? And I mean, I've mused that maybe you start to allow the population out of that half of Gaza that is run by Hamas still, allow them into the Israeli half in the perimeter and build them better towns there, maybe in Rafah specifically, maybe allow them to leave Gaza and organize an exit plan for whoever can get out, which I know sounds like ethnic cleansing, but it might be better than living under the boot of Hamas.
Well, I mean, you have Egypt, which is not going to easily accept that. I mean, that has obviously been a core security concern for the state of Egypt.
Might be options. And again, I'm not in love with this idea, but to keep things as they are and have 2 million people living upon the ruins is also not a great idea. So Hamas is betting that letting them stay is going to be the less bad option. Basically, Hamas thinks they won. And I would say that the world hasn't done enough to make clear to Hamas and to the Palestinian people that they have a choice, which is continued misery, unspeakably so, or to compel Hamas through political pressure of every conceivable kind to indeed disarm, at least in Gaza.
Obviously, you know, the idea of this international stabilization force has been up in the air for months now. The main issue on the ground was that no nation wants to come into the Gaza Strip and be responsible for peace enforcing, right? They want to be responsible for peacekeeping, but of course, the question again is how you even get to that point if Hamas is refusing to disarm and accept the leadership of any other Palestinian entity. Obviously, the Palestinian Authority is being mentioned here, but I think there is a true understanding that Hamas's control on the ground is just getting stronger every day as the ceasefire continues.
Sure. Well, I think Hamas, their position probably is we'll allow this technocratic government to come in, which, by the way, is another self-deception by Israel because it's essentially indirectly the Palestinian Authority, but Netanyahu can't accept that obvious truth, and so we call it the technocratic government. Hamas agrees to that as long as they can be in the background, waiting in the wings, as an armed militia that really, really pulls the strings, the way Hezbollah did for many decades in Lebanon. And that cannot be allowed. That's not an easy thing for Israel to accept after all the costs of the war. It would be a terrible thing for the Palestinians to have to endure. I would like to see more pressure being brought to bear on Qatar and Egypt, on Turkey and on the UAE and on Saudi Arabia, that they should take the lead in pressuring Hamas and really making clear to the Palestinians. And I want to see the resulting polls afterward that show that 90% would rather have Hamas disarm and receive $100 billion in reconstruction funds and get on with their lives.
You know, I think there are just so many political questions as to what this means for the future of the state of Israel and how this Israeli government is going to move forward in the face of the very clear understanding now that Hamas has no intention to disarm. But I want to turn to our next guest, and I'm going to hear your comments on this too, Dan, so stick with us. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has received a draft of a new constitution that could officially transform the PA into a full-fledged Palestinian state. Now, this 70-page document, which is still months away from a public referendum, aims to codify political pluralism, term limits for the presidency, and legislative oversight. But critics say that it is practical, or that we should put it this way, its practical impact on the ground is going to be very limited while Israel maintains overall security control of the West Bank. Joining us now for more perspective is Fatah activist Samer Sinijlawi. Samer, how significant is this draft constitution for Palestinian statehood, given Israel's control over the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and why is it being suggested now, especially after decades of Abbas leadership?
Yeah, this is the question of $1 million. Why did he wait 21 years old? 21 years to present a draft. Well, I think he is trying just to bluff everybody with certain announcements. I can tell you that we are now in the post-Abbas era. Abbas is done. The Americans are talking to the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza in Gaza. And Abbas is left for one Arab country, in particular, one Gulf country, and certain junior European diplomats that talk to him in Ramallah. So the center of politics has moved from Ramallah to Gaza, and we are in post-Abbas era. This is the good news. The bad news, let me tell you the legacy that he has left for us as a Palestinian people. He left us, or he is leaving us soon, with $16 billion national debt.
All right, Samad, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. I want to turn to Dan just for a final comment. Samad, you can stick with us and hear this. We just only have a minute left. You know, what is your take on this draft resolution and the future of the Palestinian Authority, especially in the face of what we're seeing take place in the Gaza Strip?
I agree with Samer. It's meaningless. No one wants a reform plan from Abbas, who's 91 and who has outstayed his welcome. The only thing that will really take the Palestinian state past another hurdle is if the Americans recognize it. And then that'll be an electric shock to the system. And until that happens, I think we're a little bit in stasis. As for Abbas and his legacy, look, $16 billion, that's also about the national debt of Albania, which is smaller than Palestine. I mean, it can be overcome with one executive order from MBS in Saudi Arabia. The big legacy of Abbas is that he failed to say yes to Ehud Olmert's offer for a Palestinian state in 2008, 2009. The catastrophic result of that, which convinced Israelis that peace is impossible, we're all living through today.